Welcome back, football fans, to another electrifying season of First and Goal. We are your hosts. I'm Big Bear T. Tyler Urbanski. Alongside me here, the curtain guy, Cole Schutte. We are entering our fourth college football season with all of you, and we could not be more thrilled to be back with you Goal Line Guardians at home. Fans, if you recall, at the end of last season, we talked about shifting our focus. The college football landscape's forever changing, and we got to change with it. So, starting this year, 2024, we are going to be diving deep into the heart of Big Ten football, bringing you all the action, analysis, excitement from one of, if not the most storied conference in all of the sport.
That's right, Big Bear. The Big Ten is entering a new era with the addition of USC, Oregon, UCLA, and Washington, expanding the conference's reach literally coast to coast. We send our condolences to the fallen Pac-12. I know we're all going to miss those late-night Pac-12 games. And we welcome the new dynamic that these teams bring to the Big Ten. The intense rivalries that these teams will create and the incredible matchups that you won't want to miss. We'll be on top of it all. Each week, we'll highlight the best game in the Big Ten, analyze the key plays and players, and bring you exclusive interviews with coaches, players, and experts. Whether you're a diehard fan new to Big Ten football, First and Goal is your ultimate source for everything happening on and off the field.
Couldn't have said it better. Guys at home, buckle up. Get ready for a season full of all these unforgettable moments, the thrilling victories, undeniable passions that make college football the greatest sport on earth. We are First and Goal. And hey, everybody, if you're watching us live on YouTube and Twitter, make sure to hit that like, the follow button, rate, subscribe, review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you're listening to us in the car, wherever you're driving, drive safely as always. But hey, if you're not following us, you got to be following us, guys. This is when we're really going to hit stride. The summer is hot. We're going to start moving into preseason and getting some reviews out there where there's going to be a lot of content coming your way. So stay tuned. So while the sun is hot and we're diving into a whole new season, we want to get everybody up to speed because there's been a lot of changes since the end of the 2023 season. A lot of topics we want to cover, and that's why we've kind of considered this episode the state of the Big Ten, because the Big Ten you left in January is not the Big Ten you have now. So first segment we're going to get into tonight, the 2024 college football playoff. The 2023 season ended. We had a 4-team playoff, and if you could argue that the two national championship teams, Cole, Big Ten teams, Washington and Michigan, we didn't really get a good chance to review that. You know, I'm sure we've got some pieces we want to talk about and touch about that game. So, Cole, any thoughts you want to pass off as, you know, the end of that 2023 season unrolled?
No, I think it's interesting that you mentioned, you know, with the landscape that changed in college football, that we literally got what is now two Big Ten teams finishing the college football playoff, and we bookended it, the CFP format, at least the 4-team format, in the same fashion, right? We started with Ohio State and Oregon, we ended with Michigan and Washington, and I feel like there's almost a bit of irony and magic in that in itself. I'm going to kind of throw stuff off the dome here because it's been a while since we obviously watched that game. I think the biggest thing that I remember from that is Washington's defensive line, one, was a bit undersized, and two, I felt like really was not gap sound. And that was going to be their ultimate undoing. We saw a lot of big runs from Michigan, and they kind of went to what has been their bread and butter for not only this past season, but for the past 3 seasons, right? They just leaned on people and eventually broke it open in the second half and put it away with their stellar defense. And you know, you have to give credit to what they built over the last 3 years. And a lot of those guys choosing to come back for senior years, they turned down a lot of NFL money, and they achieved the ultimate goal. You know, that's really where I stood from it. There wasn't a whole lot of controversy or anything like that outside of, discussions that we may have later on down the road. But in terms of just the straight football, that's really what I took away from it.
Yeah, I think that as a former Pac-12 fan, now Big Ten fan, still adjusting to that whole thing, being able to watch that game really kind of culminated all of the Pac-12 in a vacuum. The Pac-12 has always been known for these very flashy offenses, very pass heavy, and trying to run up a lot of scoring. And that's kind of what Washington was. I mean, you wanted to not call them an air raid, but they were an air raid. Michael Penix slung the ball in multiple weeks of last season. And even in the national championship, I mean, he put over 250 yards. He threw the ball 51 times in that game. And you kind of wonder, did the health of Dylan Johnson, have any sort of impact on that, not being able to be versatile with the run and the pass? But overall, Michigan was just so good on both sides of the ball. I think that they completed the quest to, I guess you could say, silence a lot of doubters, people that, didn't think they deserved it, and they just kind of put it to bed. So, looking forward though, now from that game, and if you kind of saw where the standings ended in 2023, if I recall correctly, we had like 5 Big Ten teams technically in the top 12. You had Ohio State, Michigan, Oregon, Washington. I think Penn State was either at 12 or on the verge, maybe at that 13 spot. So if you look at the upcoming 12-team playoff, the Big Ten is in a really solid position to get some teams in there. So that's what we're going to dive into tonight as our first segment, what this 12-team playoff means for college football. As you can see, if you're following us live on YouTube and Twitter, we brought the graphic up for you. If at home, we'll kind of break it down. So spots number 1 through number 4 are strictly reserved now for Power 4 conference champions. That's the Big 12, the ACC, the Big 10, and the SEC. And there's one spot reserved for the highest ranked group of 5 conference champions. So CUSA, Mountain West, the Mid-American Conference, the Sun Belt, and the American. That's going to be a very intense spot at that 5. But number 1 through 4, those get first round buys. Okay. And round 1's going to take place at the start of what would normally be bowl season. That's December 20th. That's going to either be on campus for the highest ranked seed, or the higher ranked seed has the opportunity to choose the destination of their choice. And we'll kind of get to that here in a minute. Other pieces to mention there is, ESPN normally has a stranglehold on the CFP. They're actually sub-licensing some of the games. The first round is being sub-licensed out to TNT. Normally been really heavy in basketball, but now they're starting to get some more licenses into football. And so that first slate of games on that Saturday, you're going to see games on TNT. Moving forward, the quarterfinals are going to be unchanged if you think about it, because it's December 31st and January 1st. It's going to be the Fiesta Bowl, the Peach Bowl, the Rose Bowl, and the Sugar Bowl. All those are going to take place on their normal days, and there's not going to be much change, except now it's a playoff game instead of a New Year's 6. Semifinals, January 9th and 10th. It'll be technically the Orange Bowl and the Cotton Bowl, ultimately capped off by the national championship on January 20th, 2025. That is the latest national championship I believe we have ever seen, and won't get out my history book because I just feel like football is normally over for college at that point. So I just gave you a mouthful. Cole, hearing all that, what are your thoughts on this new 12-team playoff and how it's going to shape out?
Honestly, I had a lot of thoughts about it, and I will probably continue to have a lot of thoughts about it. When the College Football Playoff Committee first announced the extended playoff format, I had a lot of concerns about it, to be honest. It felt like it was a money grab, and we would just kind of continue down this cynical cycle of 12 teams, 16 teams, 20 teams, and it was like, where do we end, right? When does the playoffs still matter? And when are we not going to make these kids play 20 games in order to win a national championship at some point? Because at some point, you're kind of taking the talent and the skill out of it, and it's more about how lucky are you? How healthy can you stay? And so that was my biggest concern. But as I spent more time reviewing the format and the selection criteria, I found a lot of potential in it. There are a lot of new aspects in the new setup that I believe are positive for both fans and players. And there are a lot of aspects that I believe could be viewed as negatives. I'll start with the fan aspect because that's where you and I live, right? And that's where a lot of our viewers live. On one hand, who doesn't love more football, right? You mentioned that this all starts at the beginning of bowl season. There's going to continue to be bowl games up and through all of these matchups. Having the season extended, getting more prime time, meaningful football. A lot of those high-end players that we've seen sit out in bowl games, they're going to participate in this because there is still the chance for a national championship. We're going to see these kids take one more, snap with their teams, at least one more snap with their teams. And I thought that it was done in the manner when you were referring to the seeding that it really didn't remove any emphasis off of the regular season or the conference championship games, right? Those games are still going to matter. You're still going to have to win the games that you need to win and some games that maybe that you're not favored in, as well as your conference, if you want to put yourself in the best position to succeed, not only in terms of matchup, but also in terms of you could potentially get a bye week. So some other team may have to get beat up and travel across the country before they even get to you, which makes the path theoretically easier for you. It is also more comforting to know that while those games still matter, losing one or two or even three, we'll have to see how it plays out, is not a death sentence anymore, right? It used to be one loss, you're hanging on by a thread. Two losses and the final nail was in the coffin, right? We saw a few two-loss teams slip in, but it was pretty much over at that point. So as I kept saying last year, and I've said over the years, one of my favorite quotes is, all you need is a chip and a chair. Well, Big Bear, now there's plenty of chairs and there's plenty of chips to go around. So you gotta get into the ballroom and you can be a part of the dance. So I think that's what's going to be really exciting about this is I think you're going to see some surprises, right? A team like Ole Miss comes to mind where people kind of wrote them off because they had a few losses in the season, but they were really impressive in their bowl game against Penn State. They could be a team that really makes some noise, and all of a sudden you're sitting there watching a semifinal game with Lane Kiffin on the sidelines, something that we would have never gotten because of how treacherous it is to get through the SEC. Now, I say all of this, and it's not all perfect. Nothing in college football is. You mentioned when we started the show, it's ever evolving. We're trying to get, things in place that make sense, that are better for fans and players. But ultimately, we're going to come up short in a few areas. I think the most of my concern comes to the length of the schedule and the overall wear and tear on the athletes, because we're fans. You and I get to sit on a couch and have beer and eat chips and watch these great games. These are the kids that are putting their bodies on the line. And knowing that some of them have to play up to 17 games in one season, it's a little unnerving for me, right? When you consider that we're not that far removed from the BCS era where most of the national championship teams had played 14 games at maximum. There were a lot of teams that only played 12, some that only played 13. So to think about the fact that there might be teams out there that have to play 3 or 4 more games in order to hoist that trophy, that's a lot. So I think roster depth and load management are going to be equally as important to get to a national championship game and win it. And so you're going to see a lot of teams that try to stockpile talent because you're going to need everybody. You're going to need the full 85-man roster. To kind of put a cap on this, overall, I believe the 12-team playoff will be great for the sport of college football, and it'll give us some great matchups, some great memories. My one last gripe, and I'm going to finish on this. Can we please stop putting the national championship on a Monday night? It irks me to no end. How we keep evolving and changing, and that remains the constant, will forever blow my mind. But Big Bear, I'm going to toss it to you. I'm going to let you put out your thoughts. Yeah, we got to stop the Monday night thing, man.
Yeah, I mean, back to on that Monday night thing, I just think that the NFL has such a stranglehold when you get to January. So when you talk about that lengthy season and you get into primetime NFL playoffs, the NFL's made it clear like we're not budging on our days, and they have Fox and they should have like CBS Saturday primetime games. You know you're not going to get those channels, or you're going to have to combat with that, and I think you're going to piss off a lot of fans, which is unfortunate for college football. I think that's where places like TNT are looking at an opportunity to get into the sports because, you know, if I recall correctly, I think TNT is losing their deal with the NBA. So now they're like, oh, we have money to spend. So we're going to get into college football. And I believe between now and 2028, I think TNT gets to add like one playoff game a year up until that point. So we're going to see more and more games. I think you're going to get guys like Kevin Harlan back on TNT and commentating college football games, which I don't think we've seen in maybe at least a decade. So that's going to be an interesting thing. Um, Other things I want to note about is we talked about the group of 5 best champion will get a bid, and that really helps get them represented. I think you're going to have a tough time picking between 5 different conferences as to who was the best between them. I think schedule's going to play really into it. I think it's going to help step up those conferences because programs are going to want to schedule better teams. They're going to want to have more limelight. They're going to want to have better performances. I think you might see a lot of transfers that end up leaving the Power Four, going to Group of 5 schools to have that opportunity. You know, I kind of think of the dream teams in other sports and load up at a Group of 5 school and run the gauntlet and get into the playoffs. So I thought that was interesting. Last thing that I wanted to talk about though was of the 4 Power 4 conference champions, who's to say a team like Nebraska doesn't lose 3 out of 4 non-conference games and then loses 1 conference game. So you're saying they have 3 losses already. Maybe they lose 1, at most 2 conference games. You got 5 loss team Nebraska, and what if they're top 2 going into a conference championship? So now you're looking at potentially you could have 4 or 5 loss teams playing spoiler for your 2 and 3 loss teams. I think that's really kind of interesting, and the fact that if they win the conference, they become automatic 1 through 4 seed with a bye. That changes the whole dynamic. It shifts the 1 through 12. I think you're going to see a lot of 12s just getting shoved out because of things like that. And I'm all for it. You know, I think this is what we wanted. This is what we're going to get. I don't think we need to expand it past this right now. I think that this is plenty. We do not need an NFL type style season, even though we're inching closer and closer to it. Okay. Question for you now. Having spoken through all those things. Okay, early signing day as part of all this shifting for the playoff got moved up to early December. It's I think the same week as conference championship week. It's going to free up coaches to focus on the playoffs. They're not going to have to divert onto last minute plane rides in mid December when they can be focusing on a playoff game. Because of that, and because of these northern cold weather type climates that we live in here in Ohio, do you see any opportunities where we could see like a first round game? Okay, take Ohio State for example. First game is December 20th of the playoff. Let's say we get 6 inches of snow that day, or they're projecting that. Ohio State has the ability, as we mentioned, to play either in Columbus or choose another destination. Do you see any opportunities or any avenues where that would work out in a team's favor, or that they might take that opportunity?
Yeah, so I'm gonna answer this in more or less two parts, but I think it's going to play a part in how some of these teams approach it, right? I think some of these coaches, these ADs are going to have to understand and know who their team is and put them in the best position possible. If we're looking at it from a broad spectrum, I don't think the cold weather will affect attendance in the slightest. College football is supremely popular across the entire country, especially in the Big Ten, especially up north. And the chance for these fans to watch their favorite team play at home one more time in the quest for a title hunt is something that they're going to flock to buy tickets for, right? Just when you thought senior day was the last time you'll see some of your favorite players don the home uniform in their home stadium, and you get that opportunity again, people are going to jump and pay whatever price it takes to be there in that type of environment. There are also a lot of Northern fans who I know would relish the opportunity to see a team from the SEC or from a warmer part of the country have to come up in December with 6 inches of snow on the ground and see how, quote unquote, we play football up here, right? That will be a huge driving factor towards it.
Love it.
Right. I think a lot of fans and how many, like, what a great environment that is, right? We don't get too many snow games in real life because we're not, by the time we get to this, we're sending teams to the Bahamas or we're sending them to arenas or domes or whatever it takes, right? Because we're trying to avoid that. Now it's unavoidable. Now you got to strap up and you got to play. If for whatever reason the school, the athletic department, the coaching staff believe that it would give them a competitive advantage to be in an enclosed, controlled environment, yes, there are plenty of options that I think you could see explored. The two most obvious ones that come to mind, especially in that northern part, that central part where most of the Big Ten lies, you're talking about Ford Field in Detroit, which we're both familiar with, having been, alumnus of back schools, right? Lucas Oil Stadium in Indianapolis, which has been home to the Big Ten championship since they started the championship game up again. But I also think U.S. Bank Stadium in Minnesota would also be a potential that they could utilize, depending on which team that you have up there. If you have a Minnesota or a Wisconsin or an Iowa, they might take the opportunity to kind of centralize it more towards their fans, right? Like I said, overall, I think it's gonna be the strategy part of it. I think schools and teams are going to determine what most benefits them, and that's what they're going to choose. But I think a lot of them will ultimately end up choosing to play at home, where they can relegate 80% of the ticket sales to their own fans in their own environment, put their team where they're most comfortable at, and make a team, come into that environment and have to beat them on their own field.
No, you make excellent points. I think the one stadium that came to mind when I was thinking of that question was Lucas Oil, because that's where the Big Ten title game gets played, and a team like Ohio State and Michigan, to be able to be on a familiar turf back to back weeks, essentially, to play then a playoff game against maybe well, not maybe, a lower seed, and being able to have that opportunity then, uh, to have that leg up was certainly a big poker chip in their favor. I've got a second question, but before we get to that, let's kind of get into segment number 2, which is the Big Ten conference realignment. For those of you if at home, if you've been under a rock, the Big Ten is now 18 teams. Does it make sense? No, but what does in college football? Okay, new members coming to the Big Ten are from the Pac 12, the 4 teams. It's USC, Oregon, UCLA, and Washington. The Big Ten has done a good job of balancing out these schedules. They're trying to ensure fair competition while also managing the travel demands going from East Coast to West Coast. They've had the addition now, they have Friday night games in college football. is something that Big Ten's getting more into. They have teams like Oregon will take advantage of that, minimizing fatigue from travel. I know the Ducks have 2 games this season. They have Michigan State on a Friday, allowing them to have a 10-day window following that before they play Ohio State. But following the Buckeyes, they will have a 6-day window to then travel and play Purdue on another Friday, which I will be at, and I'm already thinking about how that could be bad. Getting into that though, all right. So the Big Ten kind of focus on this. We're sitting here at midsummer. We have had 0 football played for 6, almost 7 months now. Do you have a team in mind that has a big opportunity to make a playoff run in 2024?
Is it being a homer if I pick the Buckeyes? That feels like I'm being a homer. Fuck it. I'm doing it anyways. Listen, it's really hard to pick against my favorite team right now. There's a lot of years that, and I try to stay unbiased as possible, and you know that. But when you look up and down the roster headed into this 2024 season, names like Caleb Downs, Quinshawn Judkins, Travion Henderson, Denzel Burke, JT Tuimoloau, Will Howard, Emeka Ibuka, it's just loaded, right? And we talked about it earlier. Not only do you need talent, you need talent stacked on top of talent if you really want to make a push for the ultimate goal. That's what they have. They have the star power and they have the depth to be a dominant force up to and through the playoffs. On top of that, I also really like their schedule. It's not the easiest thing in the world, but it's very manageable, right? You have that first quarter stretch where it's out of conference, very, easy games, tune-up games almost. I don't want to be disrespectful to some of those teams, but let's call it what it is, tune-up games. And the only major question marks I say I would have on the season are the matchup at Oregon in October, a trip to Happy Valley in early November, and the annual rivalry game with Michigan Thanksgiving weekend. And the best part about it, like we talked about earlier, even with one win out of that 3, you're probably still in the playoffs because one of those wins is still going to be a really big time, definitely top 25, potentially even top 10 win. So that's going to boost you up into the rankings. We've gone back and forth, and I know we'll have a huge discussion about it. That I have a feeling that even if this team goes into Oregon, plays close, loses to the Ducks, that's still early enough in the season that they will still have the ability to potentially have a rematch in the Big Ten championship game. But even if they don't get that, they will still be able to kind of right the ship and at least get back into the playoffs. So if they can do that, if they can find their way into the playoffs, which there's a lot of wiggle room now, they have the talent to go toe to toe with anybody. And that's why I gotta let my fan flag fly a little bit here. But I'm gonna toss it to you because I think you're gonna have a little bit of a surprising picks for our fans and viewers.
Yeah, it could be a hot take. We mentioned at the beginning of the segment that the Big Ten essentially could have had 5 teams in this 12-team playoff at the end of 2023. We had Michigan, Ohio State, Oregon, Washington, and then Penn State sitting just on the outside at number 13. Here's one that's kind of a surprise and call it a hot take. We can scorch me for it after the season if it doesn't go my way. But what about Maryland? Um, Here's why. Cole, for an example, Maryland, when they played Ohio State, was a very difficult team to play late in the season. They gave a lot of teams fits, especially Michigan. I think they had Ohio State and Michigan back-to-back weeks or twice in a 3-week span. So they had a pretty difficult schedule last year. They have a fairly easy schedule this year when you put into perspective the new Big Ten. They start off with UConn, then they face Michigan State, which, they've gotten an injection of talent. but they're still trying to kind of rebuild that program now. You have Virginia and Villanova, which, yeah, Virginia's okay. Villanova, I think those are winnable games. So what if Maryland enters into the heat and the heart of Big Ten play undefeated at 4-0? And they don't have to play Ohio State or Michigan. They do have to travel on the road in November to Oregon and Penn State. Those are two very difficult games. But again, if they are giving them the same type of fits that they were giving Ohio State, Michigan last year, there's a chance. There's a chance for them to being a team that makes a splash because they don't have to be tested over and over like some other teams in the conference will be. Another reason why I picked them, they return some decent pieces on offense. They're not, top of the conference when it talk about returning production, but they get wide receivers like Caden Prather and Ty Felton back. They have MJ Morris, who transferred in from NC State. He is a sophomore transfer. He's, a little bit unproven, but I think that he fits that style of offense that Mike Locksley likes to run. And then Roman Hemby back at running back. I think those are solid pieces. The foundation is there to be able to continue running that offense to that style they like. Defensively, they got Quashawn Fuller, they got Jordan Phillips up front, and they got like Glendon Miller. They have a decent plethora of veteran leadership in that defense that, again, could come in handy in games down the stretch where they really need those wins. And maybe even if they lose to Oregon and Penn State, if they can get past Iowa, if they can get past Rutgers, USC, this is a team that could be that 2-3 loss type team that surprised everybody. And where do they sit in that top 12? Because they play in the Big Ten now, and it's considered to be the top two conferences in college football. So that's my hot take. We'll see how that plays out. We can skewer me on the steak later, but that's what I feel.
No, I like it. You initially told me before we started the show, and I kind of had the same reaction, right? I was like, ooh, what? Where's that coming from? But listening to you explain it and actually getting to pull the schedule up here and look at it, it makes sense, right? Oregon, Penn State, Iowa, USC, those are some tough games, right? That's going to be asking a lot. I don't think they, sweep them all by any means, but yeah, I'm UConn, Michigan State, Virginia, Villanova, Indiana, Northwestern. They really could be 6-0 headed into USC, and it wasn't like USC was unbeatable last year. We saw that firsthand. They get them at home, so you could potentially be 7-1, 8-0 headed to Autzen to play Oregon. And then, like you said, even if you lose to Oregon, you still finish strong and beat Rutgers and Iowa and then lose to Penn State, sitting at 10-2 with your two losses to what is undoubtedly at least one, maybe even two other higher ranking playoff teams. That's going to look really good to the committee. So I absolutely can see it. I think they could be a team that sneaks into that 12, 11, 10 spot, even with two losses.
So circling, I guess, coming full circle on the new additions to the Big Ten. If you're following us on YouTube and Twitter, you can see the graphic at home. We'll kind of detail it for you. The 4 new teams in the Big Ten. Overall versus the Big Ten, USC leads the group with 13 wins. But total bowl wins, USC also leads that with 25. Again, you're kind of meshing what could be blue bloods and new bloods, things like that. This is a good thing for the Big Ten. I think that they hit a home run with bringing in these teams because they're covering more ground with national exposure, and they've got some teams that are just on fire right now. Total wins versus the Big Ten since 2019. USC has 3, Oregon has 2, Washington, UCLA both have 1. Washington, of course, being the college football playoff runner-up last season, so another good addition for the Big Ten. Jumping to segment number 3, coaching changes in the Big Ten. We've got guys who are out, guys who are in. First, we're going to talk about the guys who are out. we have as follows. We have Jim Harbaugh from Michigan, who left to go to the NFL. Chip Kelly left UCLA, ended up now at Ohio State as offensive coordinator. Kalen DeBoer leaves Washington to go be head coach at Alabama. Mel Tucker no longer at Michigan State due to misconduct. The list does continue to go on. We do have guys like Matt Rule now at Nebraska. Big pieces taking place there, but just a couple of guys we wanted to highlight. But with them, then we have the new hires, and we have people coming in such as Kurt Signetti, brought in from James Madison to be head coach at Indiana. Jonathan Smith, really, this one was a surprise. Michigan State hires him to lead the Spartans. He was an alumni at Oregon State, basically brought the Beavers back to national prominence. I believe they were top 10 for, I think, at least 2 weeks of last season. He leaves to go to Michigan State as Oregon State, essentially rest in peace. They are diverted to the Mountain West. And then we have Deshaun Foster taking over for Chip Kelly at UCLA. Jed Fish leaving Arizona to take over at Washington. Cole, of these coaches we just listed, is there one on this list that you think has the best opportunity to get some early success here at their new program?
You know, the first time I looked at it, I think I was initially looking at Jed Fish because I stayed up and watched a lot of later games, and Arizona was one of those that I constantly got to see, and I really liked what he did on offense. Washington lost a lot of talent from the transfer portal, and obviously that comes with the territory of losing a head coach. But kind of looking it over again, and this might be my scorching hot take that I get flamed for. I think Kurt Signetti will end up finding success at Indiana. Say what you want about the bulletin board material he has provided so far in his interviews. He is a very bold and confident man. But the dude can coach. Right, he's 119-35 overall as a head coach in his time in Division I and Division II, and he has the confidence that you need to build a program that has been a regular doormat in this conference since they joined. He knows how to take lower, underachieving programs and build winners out of them. He's never had a losing season at any stop as a head coach. He's won 9 or more games, 7 out of the last 13 seasons. The track record is there for me to believe that he can do it with Indiana. It's not going to be easy, and there is going to be a learning curve with the move to the FBS level, and especially a Power 4, and let's be honest, one of the top 2 conferences in all of America. But I think he can build the Hoosiers into a respectable program that consistently gets to bowl games, that maybe upsets a few teams here and there. And, every once in a while when they kind of get that senior laden roster, maybe they backdoor their way into the playoffs down the road. So that's the one I'm going with. But who sticks out to you?
I really like Jonathan Smith. I like that he lays the groundwork, kind of like Kurt Signetti. He is passionate. He has been able to take pieces that he's given and really turn it into something. I liked what he did at Oregon State. He's not coming in empty-handed either. He's bringing in Aiden Childs, who coming in, I believe he's going to be a redshirt freshman. I don't believe he's lost any year of eligibility, but that's going to be a really nice dual threat quarterback for Michigan State, assuming he can stay healthy and they can get the pieces around him to develop. I think that he's a really good relationship manager also. I think that's going to help him out on the recruiting trail. It's going to be hard to keep up with the bigger pieces in the Big Ten right now. To say it lightly, Oregon and Ohio State are really firing on all cylinders when it comes to NIL and relationships and setting up recruiting for the 2025 cycle. But I think that Jonathan Smith is about as good as that tier 2 of coaches in the Big Ten. I think that when it comes to recruiting, he's a guy that can get the job done. I like the way that he managed in a lot of big games. I felt that where Oregon State fell short is they just didn't have the personnel to really propel them in certain games. They had DJ Uiagalelei last year. He had a much better season, but what we knew from DJ was that he couldn't handle really key moments and big games just didn't come fond to him. I think that Jonathan Smith can put players in a opportunity to succeed, and I'm thinking he's got a bright future in Michigan State. So I hope that that pans out for him. Segment 4, we kind of put this on the bulletin just to cover it. We're going to talk about big pieces coming into the Big Ten from the transfer portal. I know a lot of them have come in. Cole, as a Buckeye fan, me as a Duck fan, we know plenty of pieces that are coming in. What sticks out to you as players now coming into the Big Ten and names that we're going to want to watch out for?
I tried to look down the list and kind of pick one guy that I thought coming in would be a big addition to a program, and one guy heading out that I thought would be a pretty big loss, no matter how much the fan base wants to play it off as not one. And I tried to stick away from Ohio State this time. There are a lot of obvious answers, as I talked about earlier, but I'm actually going to kind of head over to the West Coast and talk about your Ducks for this one, because I think Jabbar Muhammad was a big time pickup by the Ducks. You and I talked frequently last year. We did a lot of Oregon games, and I think the thing that we both felt frustration about was that your past defense left a lot to be desired, especially in teams that could actually throw the ball significantly well. We thought that there was a lot of good pieces on your defense, but that back seven, time after time, left a lot to be desired. Jabbar Muhammad can be cornerback one for the Ducks, right? He provides something that they haven't had in a long time there. And he's a guy that you feel comfortable putting on an island and kind of shifting safeties over to cover the other half of the field, knowing that he's not going to get burned there. So I think that's a big time pickup for the Ducks. The one loss that I think is going to sting a little bit more than maybe that they're admitting is Michigan losing Keon Sabb to Alabama. You want to talk about one of the best defensive backs and one of the best safeties in the country. I think Keon Sabb was prime for that season for the Wolverines. I just think that the talent behind him, it's not that it's bad, right? It's just that this guy consistently found opportunities in this past even though they were infrequent, and he kind of showed flashes that he could be that next elite level guy that they've kind of been churning out at the safety and corner position. And he was a guy that was going to really complement the corners in the system that they were running. So I think he ends up being a guy that they miss very dearly. I know that they are still confident in what they have in their back seven, and they should be, but that is a guy that I think will show you how talented he was at Alabama, and will probably have Michigan fans missing him a little bit by the season end.
Yeah, I thought it was funny that you picked an Oregon transfer because I was going with an Ohio State transfer. A lot of people know it, but Caleb Downs moving from Alabama to Ohio State. I feel like he provides a lot on the defensive side of the ball where the Buckeyes are going to need it. He is a safety with the size of a linebacker. He can cover you in short yardage, and he really solidifies the backfield that I felt Ohio State was getting gashed a bit last year. I know it's the defense has continued to start to play better in the last 2 seasons, but I feel like they're missing that vet. Like, I hate to say veteran leadership when you're looking at a guy who's going to be a sophomore, but he's a sophomore that plays like a senior, and that makes a big difference. I feel like it rallies a lot of people around you, and it's going to be a huge piece for Ohio State's defense. Kind of a double-edged sword for pieces that we're going to miss. Let's start off with interior offensive lineman. USC loses Jason Zandamela to Florida. USC needs linemen, both defensive and offensive side of the ball. You saw it with Caleb Williams last year. He was scrambling for his life. Miller Moss had a wonderful bowl game. I felt like that team was rallying, and I felt that there was a whole different chemistry, a whole different juju on that sideline with Miller Moss that I think they're going to carry forward into this year. I think that a lot of people look at USC as like, I don't know, but they said they have Zachariah Branch, possibly the best wide receiver in college football. I mean, arguably. And then you have Miller Moss, who has been on the sidelines watching the number one pick. That's not a bad thing. But you have to get him protection so that he can run that offense. And if he can't, you're in the same spot you were last year with the number one pick. So that's number one. The second one, kind of a funny one, but Iowa losing Caden Proctor to Alabama because what was for a month, maybe 3 weeks, I'm not sure, whether it was NIL driven. Caden Proctor leaves Alabama after Nick Saban retires, goes home to Iowa, is there for a very short period of time, and then decides maybe the grass isn't always greener on the other side, and he goes back to Alabama. Caden Proctor, a kid that really kind of got a bad rap in his freshman year. They talked about Alabama's offensive line being overweight. I think that he's going to have a much better year this year than he did last year, which is a good thing for Kalen DeBoer. And I'm looking forward to it. So those are my happy and sads of the transfer portal.
No, I think those are excellent picks. And not, you got me a little excited because you talked about my Buckeyes. I think most of Buckeye Nation understands how big Caleb Downs is because we have been running this 4-2-5 defense for, I believe this will be the fourth year and fourth year. Regardless, it has been predicated by traditionally Knowles wants 3 safeties, right? We have found that we can run with 2 outside corners and Hancock can be the slot guy he's a corner but he's able to kind of fill that third safety role. Lathan Ransom has done a really nice job of being that free safety. We have been searching for the strong safety part of that for many years now. We missed on Caleb Downs. Yeah, we missed on Caleb Downs. We missed on the number 1 safety the following year. I'm blanking on his name. I know he went to Georgia, KJ Bolden.
Mm-hmm.
So to have another chance at the Caleb Downs recruitment and to nail it this time, not only nail it, but to bring him back with experience of playing in the SEC, playing for Alabama, playing for Nick Saban, playing in the playoffs, and to have that business mentality and that talent feels like the last piece of the puzzle for what I believe will be a top 3 defense in all of college football. So I wholeheartedly agree with that pick that he's the guy that we've been waiting a long time for. Before we get to the next stuff, I want to ask you too, while we're talking about transfers, how big is Dillon Gabriel to the Ducks?
He's huge, truthfully. I think that Oregon did a good job of landing 2 quarterbacks. Granted, when you landed Dante Moore, you had to know that you could start him, but I think that they did the right thing. They brought him the approach that, look, you can sit behind a veteran quarterback who's been in college football for a decent amount of time, similar to like Bo Nix was last year. Learn from him, study the offense, and then it's yours. You've got 1 to 2 years to show your stuff, go to the NFL. That's a great selling piece to a transfer. Dillon Gabriel, though, to be able to land him is huge because without him and you're stuck with, I mean, maybe, you just have Dante Moore, but even if you don't have Dante Moore in that case, Oregon's searching for help at the quarterback position. They have Austin Novosad, who is a sophomore, more of like an air raid type quarterback. He was heavily sought after by Baylor. And I just don't know if that necessarily fits the approach we're going for right this second. It'll be interesting to see if he decides to stick around with, Dante Moore now being in the wings. But I think that Dillon Gabriel does a lot of things similar to what Bo Nix was doing last year. So I think he's going to fit in really well. I think that guys like Tez Johnson are going to be able to thrive in that type of offense. I think that the additions of Evan Stewart is going to be huge because it takes pressure off of Tez Johnson. Now you're able to run Evan Stewart, Tez Johnson, Trayshawn Holden, Kyler Casper, a guy that not a lot of people have talked about. He hasn't seen the field enough yet. I expect him to have a lot of playing time this year. He's 6'5". The dude's going to get some looks. And then another piece that we'll get to as the season goes on, Cole, when we get to the Buckeye episode, but something Ohio State will probably want to look at is Terrence Ferguson, our tight end. He's a believe he's not even redshirt. I think he's just a senior, played all 4 years. He is probably as vital to the offense as anybody. And him being able to get going and have a full season under his belt is going to be huge for Oregon in that passing. But it all stems back to Dylan Gabriel, his ability to extend plays and stretch the field throwing the ball. So huge addition.
Yeah, I mean, you talk about the tight end, and again, like you said, we'll get into it later. But we saw that the Buckeyes were vulnerable to the tight end, and Michigan utilized that very well. A lot of teams utilized it for a lot of success. Now you're hoping that the addition of Caleb Downs kind of nullifies that to some extent. But I'm glad you mentioned Evan Stewart. That was another one that I remember seeing, and then it just kind of went in the back of my head because I see him in the same capacity that I see Jabbar Muhammad, right? Just that piece that you were missing. It wasn't that Oregon's receivers this past year were necessarily bad, but if you want to be that elite team, you need a guy like that. You need a guy that can take the top off of a defense, that can take a tunnel screen or a short slant and break one tackle and be gone. And I feel like Oregon had a really nice group of possession receivers. They did really nice jobs of coming back, especially when Bo Nix would break out of the pocket. But they didn't have a Marvin Harrison, right? They didn't have a Roma Dunze. Now they got somebody like that. And to team him up with somebody who's as dynamic as Dylan Gabriel, I agree. I think the Ducks will find a lot more success on offense, even than they did last year. And that's saying a lot.
Yeah, I think it's nice for us as Ducks and Bucks fans to be optimistic for the season. I think it's going to be very, very intense. I think there's going to be a lot of weeks where I'm probably pacing more than normal because I'm not going to be expecting 40 to 38 type games. I'm going to be expecting more like a 24 to 17 defensive. I mean, I don't like it. It's got good and bad, but I'm excited to be in a conference that means something. And that's unfortunate because, rest in peace, the Pac-12. But I am very much looking forward to this season. So recapping for everybody here before we go, we've talked about the college football playoff. We've talked about the new Big Ten. We've talked about the new coaches, new players, all these faces. And that's just barely brushing the surface. Cole, we are going in the next couple of weeks. We're going to start previewing the Big Ten teams and what the season's going to look like for them. Those fans at home watching us and paying attention to the show live on Twitter and YouTube, reach out to us, DM us, respond to the tweet, tell us who you want to hear us talk about on the show, who we need to look out for in certain previews, and you just might hear it come up on the show. Last thing before we go, if you're not following us, YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, @goal_first could pretty much find us anywhere. Like, rate, subscribe, review. We love being with all you guys. Goal Line Guardians at home. The season is almost here, people. We're almost there. We are like 40 days away. There's 2 Duck jerseys released. Things are looking good. Any final thoughts, Cole?
No, it's just I know it was a long hiatus. We appreciate all you guys being patient. Life gets tricky sometimes, and it kind of got in the way there for a little bit. But super happy to be back. Super happy to be on this new beautiful platform that Big Bear has put all this time and energy and talent into. And I'm ready to get this thing kicked off, man. I'm enjoying the rest of the summer, but you and I are both getting itchy, right? We're ready for college football. The new NCAA 25 game is out. Big Bear will finally be able to access it tomorrow. He's been chomping at the bit for it. But yeah, I'm ready, man. Let's get at it. It's our fourth season, and I'm ready to build this thing even bigger and better than we did before.
Boom. Well said. And expect a lot more content. I forgot one thing to shout out. So in this bottom corner, see that down there, everybody? The walk on red shirts. Shout out to the boss man Jake for giving us the opportunity to even have this platform. We appreciate it more than he even knows. And we are growing this thing, and we couldn't do it without him. So check out our latest stories. Check out our other podcasts, the Walk On Red Shirts. So much content coming out, you guys. You are spoiled with the stuff we're bringing at you, and we hope you enjoy it. So without further ado, we will let you go. We will be back soon. And this has been First and Goal.